Totul me fez me I was scared.
I think society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me.
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
I might as well just get rid of it. So I went to the garage. I got an X.
Shh. I closed my eyes.
Suspicious activity.
I was crying so hard. And all of a sudden he was there.
It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Dead more body. It's the living you gotta worry about.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome once again to Profiler Africa. My name is Paul Llewellyn. On the morning of January 20th, 2003, a crime of unparalleled savagery was discovered at a house in Sea Point, Cape Town. 9 men were dead, executed in a brutal massacre that horrified the nation. One man, Quinton Taylor, was left for dead, but he miraculously survived. And tonight we're going to be telling the story of that incident, through Quinton's eyes. So a really exciting episode this evening to help tell us the story. It's always a good night when you can say that you're joined by the person who literally wrote the book on the case. We are joined once again by Nicole Engelbrecht. She is, of course, the author of the definitive book on this case, Sizzlers, the hate crime that tore Sea Point apart. And she is also, of course, the creator of the South African true crime podcast and channel, True Crime South Africa, one of your favorites, I know. Before we jump into the case tonight, Nicole, I am just going to do this.
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free. Or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember, trust nobody.
Okay, Nicole, good evening. Hi.
Good evening, Paul.
Just had to get a little bit of business out of the way there. So just to let everyone know at home, first of all, welcome to the show. Please do jump on the chat. We've got an amazing episode for you tonight. Going to be really deep diving into the case. We've got Quinton Taylor telling the story of what happened to him on that fateful evening, that fateful Sunday evening, in his own words. Unfortunately, tonight we're not joined by Gerard, but that's okay, Nicole, because I figure that the top two out of the 2 out of the 3 best looking people in true crime is pretty good going. We don't.
There's someone else on.
We're fine with our number 3 on the list, and a good opportunity, guys, to get in if you got any complaints about Gerard while he's not here, perfect opportunity. If you want to complain about him leaving us and running off to Canada, tonight's the night. Drop it in the chat, okay? Welcome everyone. Hi Marius. Hi Purple Fish. Hi Marlene. Hi Wayne. We've got a whole bunch of people joined already. Okay, Nicole, let's not beat around the bush. We're going to go straight into the case tonight because we've got a lot to cover. My first question to you is I just want to set the scene, get a bit of context first. And to do that, let's first of all talk about your involvement in this story and how it is that you came to author a book on this case.
Sure. So I think these days, these things are starting to find me more than the other way around. And that's what I found over the last 6 years is the same thing happened with Samurai. With Samurai Sword, my first book. The people that I needed to sort of tell the story started finding me quite early on in my journey. And one of the first was Nick Nevin, the paramedic. So over the years, these people sort of made their way into my life either by reaching out just to share their stories or, for instance, in the case of Visser, who's the sister of one of the victims, she just reached out and asked if she could share her petition at the time on my Facebook group, which is quite big. And I, of course, said yes. And we started chatting. So all of these people sort of started coming into my orbit. And then, of course, you and I and your producer Amy and Gerard worked on something to do with Sizzlers as well. And through that, I got in contact with Quinton. And after I'd written Samurai Sword, because of the big focus on parole, I knew that I wanted the next book to focus heavily on parole. And when I realized, when Lee said to me that Adam Woest was up for parole, I thought this would be, for that reason, if it was just for that reason alone, a really important story to tell at the time. But also, this case has got such relevance even today, even though it happened so long ago, just through the elements of the LGBTQ plus community, male victims, which don't get spoken about a lot. And I just thought there was so much relevance, and it was an important time to tell the story again. So I guess that's really how I found my way to the case.
Yeah, it's interesting in this time of, it is interesting when you mention that about kind of male victims. And, we do forget that in South Africa, something like 87% of murder victims are men. Of course, overwhelmingly the perpetrators as well, but of course, overwhelmingly the victims also. And I think an angle we don't I think, pay enough attention to really is that, our men out there are not just, enacting these, violent acts, but also very much victimized by these things. Tell us a little bit about Quinton, just your impressions of Quinton. Just set the scene. Now, the way we're going to handle this tonight is we're going to play a few clips of Quinton, and then we will discuss afterwards. But before we jump into the first one, just your impressions of him.
Sure. So I think, firstly, a huge privilege to be able to communicate with him initially. I was just really grateful that he even got back to me, because what I found overwhelmingly is that people who've lived through these kind of experiences have often had really bad experiences with people that they consider to be in the media. And I understand that is how people see me. When they don't really understand what I do yet. So firstly, I was just really glad that he was willing to chat with me. And then, speaking to him on the phone and then meeting him in person and having quite a few meetings together with him when I was writing the book. He's really just such an incredible person. I don't think anyone, and I certainly can't fathom what he's lived through and how he's come out on the other side of it. Mostly really positive. Consistently, his one message that he wants to get across is that if he can live through something like this and still be positive and push on through life's challenges, then he wants other people to take that from his story as well. And I mean, of course, you can see the impact that the trauma has had on him. Of course, that's going to, considering what he went through, but just a really incredible person, a really interesting person, and someone that I'm very privileged to have been able to meet.
Absolutely. Okay, well then let's meet Quinton. And in our first clip, he's going to talk to us a little bit about his early life. Here we go.
Okay, my name is Quinton, and asking me where I came from is a bit tricky because I don't really know. I grew up in 3 different children's homes in the Orange Grove area, Orange Grove, Norwood, that area. Left Joburg when I was about 19, stayed in Cape Town, and then after the shooting, moved to Knysna. I've been in Knysna for about 20 years. Yeah, but growing up, it was good. I mean, I had a good life. People always think that homes are very institutionalized, and they were. We were going through something called Malui therapy, so we were actually a new test kind of subject in my days. So we would have a house that would look like a house, not institutional, but it would have a house. It would have a back garden, a pool. It would be a normal pre-World War II house. So kids got the feel of a normal environment, which was great. I mean, the backyards were always awesome. I actually spent time in all 3 of them. I was adopted. When I was 14. My name was officially changed when I was 18.
Okay, so that's Quinton just telling us a little bit about his background. And here he is on how he found himself at Sizzlers a decision that was really born out of desperation.
Okay, so you're talking about, I'm looking at 2000, 2001. Okay, so where I was at that time. Sure. Okay, so basically I was very lost at that time. I had basically, I had actually gone to Nice in 94, 95 actually. Spent some time there and I'd fallen in love with it. Then I went back to Neisner in 98. And I stayed on in a place called the Transformation Farm with some hippies and stuff like that. And that was a very dark experience for me. And so I wanted to go back home to my doctor parents who lived in Cape Town at that time. And so I went back home, and you've got to understand that they're not my parents. They adopted me when I was 14. They kicked me out when I was 18. They don't really know me. And so I had lived on this land, and the Visser said, listen, I can sell you a piece of my land, 10K, you can have your own land. Now, I know now that that's a beast load of rubbish. You can't do that by law. I didn't know then. So I went back home and spent some time with my parents. And I sat down, spoke to my dad and said, listen, I need 10K. And he said, tell me why. And I told him why, and he laughed. He said, no, it's not going to happen. This is rubbish. So at that stage, I used all my money. I used everything to be there. So I didn't have a way to get back. And my parents they have really nice aspects to them, but they have really brutal aspects to them. And the fact that they didn't give a crap. So I'm stuck. Now I either have to walk back, back to Neisner, or I have to make a plan to get back to Neisner somehow. So basically, that's how it started. I was basically walking the streets in Sea Point, not knowing what to do. And Eric approached me, the owner of Sizzlers at that time. Eric approached me and said, listen, I see you like wandering around. I see you struggling. Can I help you? So I'm like, yeah, I told him my situation. And he said, okay, cool. That's cool. We actually looking for staff.
Okay. All right, so that's our second clip. And then one more, guys. So in this one, Quinton describes the work itself and the process that the men had to endure.
Okay. Basically, the nuts and bolts of it is this. You meet a client meets you, client chooses you. Client then, your role, I guess, would be to obviously massage it, give a full body massage. What you would then discuss with the client is if it was to go further and how much it would be then. As a masseuse, you could either sleep on the property or you could have your own house or whatever. Unfortunately, I actually stepped on the property, which was a mistake. The boys do nothing. The boys basically sit in a room all day and wait for clients to pick them. They call it a fishbowl. So they basically wait to go to the fishbowl, and it's very dehumanizing. You get naked, you stand in front of a fishbowl, and the guy checks you out and decides whether he actually wants you or not.
Okay, so Nicole, those are the first three clips then. So that's Quinton. First of all, let's talk a little bit about what the social climate was like for the gay community at the time. You give us some thoughts there.
So I think, I spoke to a few people who lived in the area at the time, and certainly the feeling that I got was that there was almost the sense of a large amount of Sea Point being very well aware that there was a queer community among them, and sort of being happy to allow queer people to exist among them. And while there was still sort of this line where there was judgment from a lot of the community towards queer lifestyles, but the queer community itself in Sea Point banded together. So there was almost the sense of camaraderie, and everyone knew everyone within the community, and those bonds were extremely strong. So when something like this eventually happened to people within the queer community, it hit them really, really hard.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit about Sizzlers itself. the actual space, the venue, because I mean it's a pretty typical suburban house, essentially.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, walking past it, there were very few photographs from the outside, from what I could find in the resources. But I mean, luckily you've now got Google Maps that goes back quite far, so I could get pretty good idea of what it looked like then. And it's completely inconspicuous. You would never say what, that's they were. Yeah.
Well, okay. Nicole, are you with us? Okay, we seem to have. Oh wait, Nicole, there we go. Okay, we lost you for a second there.
Get this.
It's quite all right. If you drop off, I'm going to be winging the next hour by myself. It's going to be the least entertaining 45 minutes of content on YouTube. If that happens.
Oh,
So we
goodness.
lost you just about 3/4 of the way through there.
Okay, well, if you lose me again, you can just grab a copy of my book and just read to the viewers, okay?
No, don't worry. I got lots of clips, Nicole. I'll make a plan. Okay, you know what I mean.
Okay.
I'll
All
dance.
right. Yeah, so I mean, the house itself was certainly totally inconspicuous. A house that you wouldn't look twice at when you walk past it. Eric, who Quinton had referred to in his clip there, was Aubrey Otgaar, who was the owner of Sizzlers. He had started Sizzlers a few years before. And for the most part, Sizzlers was really seen as sort of, if you were in the male to male sex trade, it was one of the places you wanted to work, because Eric was seen as, or Aubrey rather, which was his real name, he was seen as one of the better individuals running sex trade establishments in the area and really across the country. He was actually quite well respected. He treated his employees fairly. He had a really good reputation. So Sizzlers was well known, especially among tourists who would come to Cape Town for over December for holidays and then look to use services like this. So it was actually a really well known place. And I think somewhere that let's face it, these were illegal things that were happening behind closed doors. It's still illegal today. And I guess the police probably knew sort of what was happening there and may have looked the other way. But at the time, there was a little bit of pushback from some members of the community to get them shut down, but it was nothing that Aubrey hadn't thought he couldn't handle.
Yeah, absolutely. Were they busy? I mean, so the incident happened on a Sunday. Would they have been taking a lot of clients on a Sunday, or were they open on a Sunday?
So I think Sundays particularly were not super busy days, because I think Sunday is often seen as a bit of a family day. So you may not have your regular customers breaking away from home around that time. But because of the time of year it was, there was still a lot of tourists in Seapoint. So the Sundays in general weren't extremely busy for them, but they had a decent run of clients coming in that day that had booked appointments.
And I mean, I gather that the guys are kind of known in the community. You talk about the owner being well respected in the trade, but just kind of in the community, were they kind of looked down upon, or were they left to their business?
So interestingly, a lot of the guys who worked there, they did, not a lot of them stayed for very long. So they were sort of in and out. Many would stay for a couple of months, which in the trade is actually pretty good, because a lot of these guys are only really staying weeks, maybe sometimes days at different establishments. So some of their friends didn't actually even know that they worked at Sizzlers. But for those who knew the trade and who were sort of aware of this sort of dark underbelly, if you will, they were aware of the Sizzlers boys. They would gather in the popular restaurants. And I mean, Adam Woest would actually, as a waiter, had served the Sizzlers boys and Aubrey Otgaar as they'd sat around having a meal together in restaurants. So it wasn't like they were sort of hiding, but I don't think they were advertising what they were doing either.
Absolutely. Okay, everyone. I'd like to invite everyone to join in the chat and drop your questions for Nicole on the case. Of course, like we say, she wrote the book on it, so tonight's the night for you to get all those questions on the case that you had while you were reading the book, which I hope you guys have. If you haven't, make sure you get a copy. So get your questions in, please do. Like I say, hi everyone to the chat. Once you start dropping some questions in there, I'll start fitting them into the discussion. I think what we can do before we move on to the next clip, Nicole, we talked a little bit about the location. Let's take a look. We do have a copy of the full crime scene video that was filmed on the night of the attack. Obviously, we've censored the graphic elements, but this just gives you a sense of the space and the mood. I mean, a creepier video you will go a long way to find, I think.
Die 20ste van die 1ste maand 2003. Ek is inspekteur Sergio van die plaaslike kriminele rekordsentrum Kaapstad. Ek staan af te Grypstraat nommer 7 C-punt waar by 'n moordtoneel was 6 en meer mense na bewering aangeval is en van hulle noodlottig beseer was. Gaan voort met die toneel. In die eerste kamer van die toneel.
Yeah, it's the music in the background that gets me. I won't lie, because that music plays throughout the video, and it just kind of adds to the impact of it. Obviously, what you were seeing there in that front room is essentially where the majority of the bodies were. I think there were, majority of. I was at six guys in the first room. I think it was around 5 or 6 guys in the first room.
I think it would have been 7 because there were 2 out, and then Quinton was at the petrol station.
There you go. That's right. Okay, so that's then gives you a sense of the space and the scene itself. Now we're going to go back to Quinton, and this is him essentially describing the moments just before the killers walked in.
There was a boy there, he was 17 years old. He had lied and he had said, I think he was 20 or something, but he was 17. Beautiful little boy. There were choir boys there, man. I met a guy that sang in a choir. He was Catholic. All these people had their own stories and their own issues and their own reasons why they were there. So like I said, you feel a camaraderie, you feel a connection because they're all going through their own struggle. They're all here for a reason. And they're all good people. They're all decent people. They're not nasty. And I mean, on that day, for example, it was a Sunday, and all we were doing is we were cleaning house. We had chosen to spend clean for the day. We were actually off. We were actually supposed to be off that day. We weren't supposed to do any cons. And we landed up doing spring cleaning and watching the Broken Hearts Club and just being guys, just doing our thing, smoking weed, just, And then these 2 guys came in, and man, when they came in, I was still at the top bunk rolling a joint. I was still questioned about this in court. One of the lawyers wanted to nail me for weed, and I said, listen, weed doesn't make you stupid. I still remember what I saw. But anyway, point is, I was on the top of the bed rolling joints when these guys came in. They were taken through to the screening room. As the person left to go call the boys, they put on balaclavas and guns out, and they walked through the house to us. And basically told everybody, listen, this is a stick up. I didn't even understand it at first. I was thinking these guys were joking. I didn't connect. I was like, it's so, when something like that happens, when people walking with guns, it's so unexpected that you don't actually expect it. It's like, what the heck? And they got us down, and we all sat down, and we were all confused. And there was a client there as well. And we were all confused.
Nicole, You've obviously done extensive research and spoken to multiple people about this case, those who were first responders, the detective on the case, Jonathan Morris, if I'm correct, who was going to join us. We nearly got him to join us tonight, but that's something we're going to park for future. So we'll be able to revisit this case and actually get the detective's perspective in a future episode. But thank you for your effort in trying to line that up today. Just talk to us a little bit about just Quinton's recalling of the incident.
So I think that's something that I've learned about trauma over the years, with having the privilege and the honor of dealing with individuals who've been impacted by violent crime, is that trauma often firstly affects your memory over time. Your initial recalling will be really good, and then over time it can, as you process the memories, things start to change. So what I've often found with Quinton does sometimes, sort of in his remembering of the crime, the important stuff is 100%. He knows what happened to him, but there's tiny little details that I think have perhaps over time changed shape in his memory and changed position in his memory. So there's small little things that are off. And I think that, just looking into it, this was my first experience of something like that with a survivor. And then just looking into it, I actually found that was quite common, especially, Quinton endured a brain injury as well.
Yeah.
So it's not just the emotional trauma, there's a little bit of physical trauma there as well that he lives with. So there are a few things off in his retelling, but I think what comes through for me, and it is so important, is he brings through the emotion of the moment, and his emotion is always going to be spot on because he's the only one that's ever lived through that.
And when we get into some of the actual detail of the injuries he sustained, the fact that Quinton is still with us is quite a miracle. It's quite incredible, in fact. Okay, we're going to jump into the next clip. What followed essentially was hours of terror, and the men were bound, gagged. But even in that moment, Quinton made a decision that it was a small decision, but it was a powerful act of defiance, and a decision which I think, he even recounts it as something which, was impactful. But let's jump into our next clip. Sorry, guys, I'm doing a lot tonight for handling clips and scripts and everything. So I just want to make sure I don't jump ahead and play the wrong clip for you guys. And here we go.
I know that there was one client, his sister was actually at the trial. Colored gent. And he was with one of the young Catholic boys, the one with son in the choir, Sergio. And they were actually protected for the first part of it. They were in a studio already busy. So these guys didn't know that. So they did all their things, but they were there until they came out. There was 10 of us in total. No, yeah, 7. Yeah, so there was 8 of us boys, Eric and the client. Yeah, so there was 8 of us there that day. So basically, well, like I said, they came in, basically separated us from each other, put us all on our stomachs. Except for me, I told them I wanted to be on my back. I wanted to actually see what was going on.
Yeah, and it was that decision which Quinton certainly puts down to really impacting his survival.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if I remember correctly, the surgeon even mentions to him as well, that's one of the surgeons that operates it on him to take the bullets out of his head, mentioned that the trajectory of the bullets, as opposed to because some of the other victims had ended up in the hospital as well, and the injuries they'd seen on those other victims had been different to his, and they put it down to the fact that he'd been laying in a different position than they had.
Yeah. We have a little question. Why did they film the scene and not take pictures? Well, they did take pictures as well. We just happened to have access to the video on this case as well. We will look at, I've got a few of the crime scene photographs, but the majority of them, I could really just show you a blurred image. So because they are very graphic. But we will look at some of those a little bit later. Okay, so the other thing is that from his vantage point, Quinton had a clear view of the two attackers, and obviously they were there for a number of hours. Adam, Woest, and Trevor Tace is who they turned out to be. And he bore witness to their disturbing dynamic, which he speaks about now.
Adam was super aggressive from the beginning. The thing is, and I actually said this when I was in court, Adam was white. Adam was on coke or something. He was pacing the whole time. He was angry, he was angry, he was sweating, eyes big, poof. The fact that they brought their own knives, the fact that they brought their own rope, the fact that they bought petrol and stuff, it was all premeditated. But he was antsy. Trevor was the one that was directed by Adam, not the other way around. So like Trevor was very apologetic all the time, very like trying to be soft, but not really. Whereas Adam was more intense, very intense. I just watched the conversation between two of them. So I know for a fact that Adam was definitely the stronger one. Way stronger, character-wise.
Okay. So Nicole, Quinton calls the crime premeditated. The killers claimed it was a robbery gone wrong, but your book argues it was possibly a hate crime. Can we talk a little bit about motive and your perspective there?
Sure. So I think even in court, the judge cast his own doubts on how this could have been a robbery gone wrong. Just the evidence didn't speak to that. They had stayed there for 3 hours. They had not put their balaclavas on, which they'd brought with them. They had brought, implements with them that were essentially implements of torture. You don't bring petrol to a robbery. And just their behavior while they were there did not speak to a robbery gone wrong. The simple fact was just the time period. When you're committing a robbery, you get in, you get your money, you get out. And that's just not what the crime spoke to, but that is what they stuck to. They stuck to this being a robbery gone wrong, and that elements of what Quinton talks to there about the rage that Adam had when the autopsies were done. The individuals who Adam identified as him having killed, the autopsy showed that the injuries to those victims were far more severe than the injuries that Trevor Tace had inflicted. His knife wounds were deeper than Trevor Tace's. It spoke to a violence and a hatred that you do not use when you are committing, in my opinion, a robbery where you suddenly get spooked and you realize, oh, they've seen my face, I'm going to have to kill them. That's a gunshot to the head. That's not binding them, forcing them to lay down, pouring petrol over them. To me, and it would be great if we knew a profiler and he could speak to these, But, this speaks to a sense of hatred. And for me, that is what the victims we were looking at, their profile, many of them were, and I have to say this, many of them were, just because they were working in the male-to-male sex trade does not necessarily mean they were gay. It doesn't necessarily mean they were bisexual. There are straight men that work in the male-to-male sex trade. But many of the men were either seen from the outside as queer or part of the queer community. And that's one element of a possible hate crime. And then the other fact is that they were all sex workers. And we know that sex workers are targeted for violence very regularly. So it just, all of those elements did not, there had to be, for me at least, some elements of a hate crime from Adam's side.
Yeah.
For Trevor, I believe there was a different motive. As Quinton speaks to there, I do certainly believe that Trevor was led by Adam to a certain extent. Trevor claims he didn't know anyone was going to die when he walked in there. I don't believe that, because he didn't try to mask his identity or anything like that. And these guys knew their faces.
Yeah.
I believe that Trevor thought there was more money in it for him than there actually was, because there was a very small amount of money in the safe. But he was prepared to kill for money when he walked into that house that night. But I personally believe that Adam's motive went way beyond financial. Whether it was an internalized sense of homophobia, that's possible, but there was definitely an element of hate towards these men for some reason.
I recall mention of one of them being in a relationship, and the girlfriend had gotten into a possible lesbian relationship. Is that true?
Yeah, so that was Trevor.
Yes, okay.
Trevor Taste was a divorced man, and he had 3 children, and then he had a girlfriend. And the girlfriend had allegedly had an affair with a woman. And this had apparently deeply hurt him. And that was raised sort of in the media and things like that. But when the psychiatric assessments were done, the doctor psychiatrist that assessed Trevor said that at the time he clearly had sort of feelings that he hadn't dealt with around this, but what he saw as a betrayal. But for her, it was actually less about the fact that his girlfriend had slept with a woman and more about the fact that she slept with anyone else. So there wasn't really an element of homophobia there. But yes, that was Trevor Taste. And then Adam Woest, his brother was actually gay, and allegedly had a great relationship with his brother. So there was it was all a bit twisted there.
Yeah, because we're getting a couple of questions. Why did they torture them, and how long did they torture them? Make that a little bit. How long did how long did it actually go on for, Nicole?
So almost 3 hours. They were there in total for almost 3 hours. And look, the elements of torture, a lot of it was psychological, because these men were bound. They were forced to lay on their stomachs, except for Quinton, who refused. And I think if we even bear to consider ourselves in that situation, and you see these guys running around the house with guns, with knives, you're tied up, you're completely helpless. That in itself is psychological torture.
Absolutely.
And then you start having petrol poured over you. And then Adam started, and then of course they started hearing gunshots because they shot the Gregory Berghaus, who was the client, and Sergio first, and then came into the room to shoot the rest of them. In terms of why they tortured them, so, I get into a couple of theories in the book, and one of those theories is that something that's never quite made sense to me is that these 2 men posed as clients, allegedly, to get into the house, because there was really good security in the house. As much as this had been, the business was sort of accepted in Sea Point, Aubrey knew that he had to be, there was a possibility of robbery first, and there was a possibility of homophobic crimes against his staff. So he protected them. He, kept the gates closed and all that sort of thing. And people had to make appointments and come up to the security gates. And one thing that's never been explained is Aubrey and many of the men that were there that night, firstly, they knew Trevor Taste as a taxi driver who'd often driven them to appointments outside. And they knew Adam Woest from his waiter job at a pub and grill that they often frequented. And one thing that stood out for me that no one had really ever explained was why Aubrey and the young men would have thought that an allegedly straight man, or 2 allegedly straight men, would be booking an appointment at a male-to-male sex establishment and go through with the appointment process as though this had happened before, which made me wonder whether it had happened before and whether Adam had actually had dealings with the men at Sizzlers beyond being friends and serving them drinks and food at the grill he worked at.
Okay. Nicole, we are going to return to Quinton's retelling of the story in a moment.
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, Knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free, or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember, trust nobody.
Okay, so as the ordeal continues, then the atmosphere in the room became one of absolute terror. Here, Quinton describes the chaos and the fear as the men realized that they were going to die.
There was a mixture, man. You got to understand. I mean, we were screaming. I have no problem admitting to you that at that specific time, at that specific night, I was terrified. We were all terrified. Yes, we knew that we were going to die. I mean, if you have any kind of brain cell, you know you're going to die. You know things are going to happen. So yes, we all try and you should. If you have a good fight response, you should try and fight it. I'm not going to lie down to somebody without trying something. And so we were all agitated and all those things. There was a whole slew of emotions, man. There were some boys screaming. There were some boys swearing. You don't know how you'll react until you're in that situation. You never know. So it was intense. It was intense. When I woke up after being shot, all I could smell was that iron smell, that iron they call coppery smell from blood. That's all you smell throughout the whole room.
And after the gunshots, Quinton woke up to a scene of horror, and somehow, he found the strength to escape.
Okay, so basically, again, one of the clients that was there had broken free, and he had tried to attack to take the pistols off them, and he was pistol whipped, shot in the dad. And then after they had shot him, they then came through immediately, and we all heard the shot. And we all knew, okay, cool, no, there's not much you can do. I mean, they retied all the ropes. There's not much you can do at that stage. And so at that stage, you wait for it. And the impact is very hard. You don't really feel it. Basically, what happened is they came in, you hear all the gunshots. I didn't even know. I had no clue. Because I was shot once here and once here. So that impact is so heavy that you don't feel anything, you're just gone. I have no clue when I woke up. No clue. I have no clue how long it passed. What I do know is that the door was about to open, the idiots. They didn't lock the gate. If they'd locked the gate, I would have died from loss of blood. They left the gate open. Ran out of their better clubs because they were terrified. After they'd done all the shooting, they had to get out of there. So basically, their mistakes were my salvation. Them leaving the security gate open, my salvation. So basically what had happened is I woke up, the ropes were already buffed me head. And I actually walked through to the bathroom. I wanted to see my face because I knew something was wrong. And I had to step over the blood and I checked my face. My jaw was shattered. My jaw was over here. My jaw was completely, like I couldn't open my mouth. My throat was bleeding and like I had this like caked blood there. So I basically went to the phone. I tried to phone and that didn't work. And then I just walked out. I walked to the petrol station.
Sure. I was actually the one that did this interview, and it's really taken me back. It really takes me back when I watch these clips. It really is something, sitting down with somebody and kind of sitting in the room and discussing this kind of ordeal with somebody. How did he survive, Nicole? I mean, talk to us a little bit about the first response as well, the first responders and kind of their views on what they walked into.
Sure. So essentially what happened was, it was just after this, where Quinton leaves off as he's moving out of the house, there's sort of a sliding doors moment where as Quinton is pulling himself around the corner to the total garage sort of in the road just behind Sizzlers, at that moment, a client is pulling up in a taxi to the house. And this client immediately realizes something's wrong because he's been to Sizzlers before. He's a regular and he sees the gate standing open. But he only realizes later that as he's walking in, he's actually stepping over the blood that Quinton's left as he's gone round the corner. And this client walks into the houses and unfortunately gets firstly the smell of petrol and blood, and is faced with a scene of horror, turns around, runs out. And by this time, Quinton has arrived at the garage already. The first individual at the garage, a staff member that saw him sort of stumbling towards him, thought that he was drunk. It was a weekend, it was apparently not an uncommon thing for a bar fight to spring out. So that he thought that's what it was. And then as he got closer, he obviously saw his injuries, and he saw the tape still hanging off the side of his face and realized something really bad had happened. So there were quite a few emergency calls in place at the same time. And one was an ambulance that was called by the Total Garage employees for Quinton. So that was one ambulance. And then as the client that had arrived at the house, he went round and he was able to make a call to alert the police officers. And there were 2 police officers en route, one to the Total Garage, and they didn't realize that the 2 incidents were connected. Within minutes, Quinton obviously said to them, I'm related to the scene around the corner. They put 2 and 2 together, and within sort of minutes, Nick Nevin, the paramedic, talks in the book about he was one of the first ambulance responders on the scene, and the street was just filled with flashing lights. Everyone from the apartments overlooking were obviously wanting to know what was going on, and and then the paramedics moved in to try and save as many people as possible. There were 3 victims that still had signs of life, and they were transported to the hospital, and the rest of the men were unfortunately already dead when the paramedics arrived.
Okay. Nicole, we are stacking up questions here in the chat. Should we just jump into a couple
Yes,
before we
do
carry on
it.
with Quinton? Okay, we've got from Anelda. If this was a robbery gone wrong, what had they hoped to steal from these guys? Surely they didn't have that much on them on an off day, money-wise.
Yeah, so this is one of the things that also doesn't add up. So according to Woest and Taze, they had got the lead from a young man who previously worked at Sizzlers. That's he'd come into the bar when they were both at the bar, and he'd been mouthing off about this huge amounts of money that's kept in this safe at Sizzlers, and this is why, according to them, they decided to hit Sizzlers. But that none of that really made sense, because anyone that had worked at Sizzlers for a decent amount of time would have known that Aubrey was very safety conscious, and he banked money at the end of every single day. So there was hardly ever large amounts of cash kept in the safe. So that is the very reason that the robbery gone wrong does not make sense. But according to them, they were trying to get essentially the massage parlor takings from the safe.
Yeah. Christopher Willemse says, you don't rob someone for 3 hours. Good point,
100%.
Christopher. Where was the place situated? Didn't the neighbors hear anything sooner? Any thoughts there on what the neighbors heard or saw? Or
So there were witness sightings. So there were a few people that had heard what they thought could be gunshots. It was very early in the morning, so anyone hearing this would either have insomnia, or this is, I think, 3 a.m. in the morning, between 3 and 4 a.m. That's they would either have insomnia, be coming back from a party, or in some other altered state. So some people had reported hearing gunshots, but not 100% realizing what it was. Others had seen Woest and Tace running out of the premises and speeding away in the vehicle.
okay. All right. We'll return to some more of your questions just now. Quinton's survival was obviously a miracle. But identifying the killers was really another minor one. With no suspects, the city in shock, the entire investigation really you know, a lot of the investigation was turned towards Quinton and whether or not he'd be able to identify who the perpetrators were here. How they were caught is an interesting story. And so we've got here now Quinton explaining to us how a 10-year-old mugshot broke the case wide open.
Trevor got, I'm actually very proud of this. It was me who caught them. Or not me who caught them, but me who got them busted. I mentioned this earlier on and I'll mention it again. Trevor had stolen his brother's BMW 10 years prior and he had a criminal record. That criminal record should have by law been expunged, but it wasn't. It was just kept there for some odd reason. Now, during my stay in the hospital, when I was able enough to actually leave the hospital, we'd go to all the police stations, all of them around Bishop Lavis, around Sea Point, around Greenpoint, around all those areas, and look through mugshots. We did that for a long time. It took a few weeks. And we were at Bishop Lavis, my last visit. And we were looking through a whole lot of mugshots, and a specific small photograph came up. Now, the eyes never change of a person. Your eyes can't change. Your face can mature, your stuff, but your eyes never actually change. They never do. So basically, I saw a tiny little picture of this color guy of Trailer, 10 years prior to this, and I just made the connection. Said, no, that's one of the guys fully. And the guy said, well, how do you know? And I put my hands by the face and I looked at the eyes. I said, that's a guy. So they did their investigation, they checked, and they found out that he was struggling with a taxi business and that he was struggling in life and blah, blah, blah. And the 10-year previous stealing of the brother's car and all those things. And Inspector Jonathan Morris didn't have to do much. He basically bluffed him. Basically said, yeah, we know it was you and blah, 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 and we've got the guns and stuff like that. And he was all too happy to give up Adam. They actually went to Vienna Waterfront and waited for Adam at his work at Key 4 restaurant.
Okay, so Nicole, maybe you can talk us through then, what were the kind of key moments in the investigation leading right up to their arrest?
Sure. So, there was quite an interesting scene that Captain Jonathan Morris described to me. Was going out to find Trevor Tace once Quinton had identified him, and how his ex-wife, finding his ex-wife, and his ex-wife had actually pointed out where he was because she thought that they were after him for speeding tickets. So she told him, I mean, she had no idea that they were actually looking for him for 9 murders and 1 attempted murder. But she actually pointed them to where he was staying. And yeah, they walked in and it wasn't a difficult arrest at that time. And as Quinton said, very quickly gave up Adam Woest's name. And then quite a difficult one, if we're talking about the partners of perpetrators, was one of the other police officers had to go through to Adam Woest's. He went through to his apartment that Trevor Tace had pointed out. And the officer met up with Adam Woest's fiancée. And Woest was not home. He was at work, and he had to sit this young lady down and explain to her that the man that she'd been with for 9 years and that she was engaged to marry was who, by all accounts from her, had never had a violent bone in his body, had actually killed 9 men and tried to murder a 10th. And that was, I think, quite a huge moment for me, trying to think of the emotion behind that. It must have been absolutely devastating for her. And then soon after that, she gave her full cooperation immediately, despite being in obviously severe shock. She gave them a clear photo of Adam, and they used that photo to then go to his place of work, which was Key 4 restaurants, and do a bit of a stakeout, and they were able to arrest him in the restaurant.
Okay. I just want to go back to the photographs I was just showing there. Just tell us just for the folks at home, just tell us who we are looking at here, Nicole.
So that's Adam Woest.
Yeah.
And that's Trevor Tace.
There we go. That's the easiest question of the night. All right, a good question here from Marlene. Did the killers have any previous convictions or crimes?
Mm. Yeah, that's the interesting thing. No, certainly not of this magnitude. Trevor Tace had the previous conviction that Quinton alluded to in his clip. He actually hadn't even stolen a car. He'd been allowed the use of a vehicle and not of a friend and not returned it on time. And the friend got a bit annoyed and put a sort of thing out for him, and he was arrested for it. So neither, and Adam Woest had no previous convictions, nothing at all. And I think these two guys were the oddest criminal couple, if you will, that you would never put these two guys together, and you would have never put these two guys with this type of crime. And just to that point, when people started to say, I often get people saying it was and this was said at the time, that it was a numbers gang, 27s, 28s, hired them to do it, and it was a gang killing. The numbers gangs are not going to hire a taxi driver and a waiter who have no previous convictions and absolutely no criminal experience to commit a mass murder. That alone tells me that these men were not hired by anyone to commit this crime.
Yeah. Anelda asked, how did Adam and Trevor actually know each other?
So they just met through Adam working at Pub and Grill as a waiter, and Trevor would come in to drink. When he wasn't, Trevor would work as a taxi driver, but he mostly actually worked in the sex trade, ferrying sex workers to their clients when they were doing off-site bookings. So that was his main source of business. And when he was between calls, he would pop into the restaurant where Adam worked, and they would get talking. And yeah, they formed a bit of a odd friendship, but one that would impact them both for the rest of their lives.
And Hendrik asked, how long after the murders were they caught? So what was the timeline between actually,
It was relatively quick. I think it was less than a month. It was like so they needed to wait for Quinton to get out of here. I mean, he'd had major surgery. I think it was about 3 weeks, if I'm not mistaken. It was pretty quick turnaround.
And any complications or anything noteworthy happen just kind of in the build up to the actual trial? Because we're going to get into some of Quinton's comments on the trial itself. But just to set the scene there for us, or were there any incidents that are worth pointing out prior to the case actually happening?
I think that, it was mainly just that there was a lot of sort of speculation around the theories about why it had been done and that sort of thing. And that was the main thing in the build up to the trial. But nothing specific other than that. And Quinton was, of course, in witness protection.
Obviously, these interestingly, these mass shootings are not one of our more common crimes here in South Africa. That said, so I mean, this will have really stood out at the time. What was the media atmosphere like and the media response like around the case at the time?
So I think, to that point now, we're seeing actually a heck of a lot more mass shootings, but with different motives, more around organized crime, especially in the Eastern Cape.
Yeah.
But at the time, this was almost unheard of. And especially the fact, where it was and what it was. It didn't look like an organized crime type of thing. And I think it was a huge shock, and the media, really the media attention, I might have expected it to be a bit more sort of sordid and almost finger pointing, what do you expect? Look what they were doing, look at the lifestyles that they were living sort of thing. Because that would be, going along with what some of the public might have been thinking. There was a lot of, actually, it was quite respectful reporting from what I saw. That I think the magnitude of what had happened, how many lives had been lost, and young, vibrant men really just trying to make their way through the world. I think that hits a lot of people in sort of quashed whatever, sort of illogical judgments their minds have had around their lifestyles.
Yeah. Okay, so we head to trial then, and in our next clip, Quinton describes seeing his attackers in court for the first time.
Interesting. It was a range of emotions when I first saw him. I felt for Trevor, the colored guy, because he showed emotion. He was crying. He was remorseful. Like I said, Adam, on the other hand, showed no emotion throughout the whole court case. He showed no emotion. So, especially for Adam, it was a lot of anger and stuff. It was a lot of anger, yeah, sure. It wasn't fear, it was anger. I was really angry at what had happened and why it had happened and what it had done to my life. But also, on the other hand, I was also at a point already at that stage where I could see that there was also positivity in us. There was ability, there was possibility now. And my mentality had already begun to shift by the time court case started. It was a very quick and very powerful process. So by the time I got there, there was a lot of anger, but there was also pity. There was a lot of pity.
And then he also talks candidly about the immense burden of survivor's guilt.
Okay, so in the beginning, for the first while, there's no guilt. I wasn't guilty. I wasn't guilty of anything. I didn't do anything, first of all. So I don't know why I should have guilt. I didn't do anything. But for a long time afterwards, it was hard because I didn't understand why I survived and they didn't. Some of these people were better than me. I'm sure they were. Some of these people were freaking choir boys. They were just better people than me. And yet they died and I didn't. So it was, I struggled with it for a while, but at the same time, it is what it is, man. I didn't ask to survive, I just did. And I believe that's why I really tried my best in court and tried my best through this whole court case to get closure for the families, because I know how necessary it actually is to move on as a person. You have to have some kind of closure. If you don't, you'll struggle, and maybe you'll never move on. But like I said, for me, I was privileged. The case was solved. The guys were sentenced. I got closure. And so that's also been a big part of being able to pick myself up and move forward, is the fact that I got closure for these families. Because a lot of the boys that I encountered in Sizzlers, I connected with them. We had experiences. We had things. We did things together. It wasn't just you're a boy, we're all boys, but we never talk. We never connect. We were friends. In that 2 or 3 weeks, you make friends with some, you connect with them. They become your friend. Yes, you haven't had them for years, but you understand. You share emotions. You become something. There's an attachment there. So that I struggle with, because two of the boys were very close. We were very close. For the time that I was there, we were very close. And so I struggled with that, especially the young boy.
I want to talk a little bit about the victims, their families. How does Quinton's feeling of needing to get closure let's talk about Quinton wanting to get closure for the families and just your experience of interacting with some of the families of the men.
Yeah, so I think, from what Quinton's told me as well, is a big part of his healing has been knowing that he was able to identify Trevor Tace, because there is a question, would these two ever have been caught if it wasn't for Quinton surviving and identifying Trevor, because they were two such unlikely criminals. Maybe the investigators would have eventually got to them, but we don't know that. So I think that him being able to play that part certainly was a big part of healing for him. And I'm always careful with the word closure, and I know some people use it and they use it easily, and Quinton does that, and that's, that it clearly works for him. Where I know Visser, for instance, when she talks about she doesn't like the word closure for herself, because she feels like, justice should happen and that shouldn't be tied to her healing process, which is also fair enough. And she also feels that her brother is never going to come back, no matter what the outcome was in the case. So, she has a bit of a different reaction to the word closure. But I think, let's face it, if these two men had not been caught and they had not been found guilty and handed down these life sentences, the agony for the families would have been far, far compounded to what it already was.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so Nicole, let's talk a little bit about the trial. What, just anything again noteworthy which happened during the trial, and then what was the outcome?
Sure. So I think two of the most noteworthy things for me was that Trevor was very much portraying himself as having been led by Adam. And Adam was also trying to portray himself as being led by Trevor. But the evidence certainly pointed to, the preparations in the run up to it and that sort of thing certainly pointed more to Trevor being a submissive, if you will, and Adam taking the lead. Really important parts of the trial would be that the two men were sent for psychiatric assessments because of the nature of the crime, not necessarily because they thought that there could be any mental health conditions present, but that's something when you have this magnitude of violence and certainly the anger and hatred that was sort of wrought upon the victims, that had to be ruled out. And that came back, I guess, clear. They were found fit to stand trial, that they had not been suffering from any mental health conditions at the time that would have impacted their ability to tell the difference between right and wrong. There was some depression found in Adam in that assessment, but nothing again that would have impacted his actions or his thought process to go and commit mass murder. But one thing that I think really stood out for me was how one of the psychiatrists had said that it was quite disturbing for her that Adam seemed to be unable to sort of understand. He knew what he had done, but he didn't seem to have very much remorse for it, because when his way of expressing remorse was by saying that he felt very remorseful that when I think it was the new Lord of the Rings movie came out, he wouldn't be able to watch it in cinema because he would be in prison. So he felt really remorseful about that. And that was just, even from what I've heard today, that's just Adam Woest in a nutshell. He'd worn a mask really well for a long time. And when he walked into Sizzlers that night, the mask came off, and I don't think he ever put it back on again.
Yeah. What was the sentence ultimately? Sorry,
So each of them was sentenced to 9 life sentences, plus additional years for the other charges. So the attempted murder of Quinton Taylor, there were weapons charges, being in possession of a unlicensed weapon and ammunition, and theft and other charges like that. But as we know, all of these run concurrently, so that those were not. It's not like they're going to serve one life sentence after the other. They're all served at the same time, and I'm sure we can talk shortly about how that would have impacted their parole.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to get there. Just tell us then what has happened subsequently with our two perpetrators.
Sure. So in 2008, if I'm not mistaken, Trevor Taze passed away. He had a heart condition that he'd lived with his entire life, and he passed away in prison. And he actually passed away in hospital technically. He'd had a heart attack in prison, and his family buried him very quickly. They actually said afterwards that they were quite worried that the public was going to get wind of the fact that he died and maybe turn up at the funeral and something like that. So he passed away, and Adam Woest is currently still incarcerated. Over the years, some of the family members have gone, and even when Trevor was still alive, spoken with him, attempted to speak with Adam. It was a bit of a interesting relationship that formed between one of the victims' mothers and Trevor Taste before he passed away. So that's sort of what's happened over the years. But for the most part, Adam at least stayed out of the news. He hasn't been really done anything that we've heard of.
Okay. We're just going to take a couple of quick questions before we jump into the topic of parole. They will have shoot. Did both Trevor and Adam shoot? Who had shot the majority of the victims?
So, who had shot the majority of the victims is up for debate because both men pointed the finger at each other as to who shot Sergio de Castro and Gregory Berghaus, who were outside of the room with all the main victims. But with the main victims, essentially what Adam instructed Trevor to do, and it was so that he would have equal culpability, was each of them had to start from one side. The victims were all lined up next to each other on the floor, and each had to start from one side and work their way along, and slit a victim's throats and then shoot them, and then slit a victim's throats and shoot them. So we don't know exactly how many of each but they definitely both shot and slit the throats of the victims.
Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about the parole situation now because Adam is eligible for parole, but we'll give Quinton the first word here.
I'll tell you why I'm angry at what you just mentioned, the whole early parole thing, is because a number of reasons. First of all, and this is the simplest of all the reasons, he's unsympathetic to what he did. And it's been proven, it's been documented in the court case, throughout the whole court case, if it was filmed, which I'm sure it was, you would see that there was no emotion. Even the judges and prosecutors, and they were freaked out by him because there was no emotion. So what would I say to them?
Yeah.
I'd say to them that they're actually a bunch of idiots who have no clue about what this man's done, how many lives he's actually destroyed. Yes, while we're all talking about positive, it's not like that for every person. A lot of people are damaged because of this. The lives that they've damaged. The fact that he had no problem or qualms killing 9 people. The fact that how many, is it not like 3 or 4 that you kill before you become dubbed a serial? So he's a serial too. Oh, wow. So now they're letting a serial killer back out into the public. They're allowing these people, these kind of people that have no regard for other people's lives, that they are complete sociopaths. They're allowing those people back into the world to feed off somebody else. So I would actually tell them they're wrong. And you make justice a joke. To do things like this, how many other cases, how many other murderers, how many other really evil people have you not let off because it's simpler that way? Because the courts or because the jails are too full or because they've been a model citizen, now we let them out. You can't, as the justice system, as the ones that dish out the punishment, you can't then look at this and say, okay, cool, but now he's okay to be released. So I would be livid. I would throw my toys out for caught.
I mean, just a powerful statement from Quinton there. And, you know, Nicole, this aspect of the case has really led you to becoming an advocate, even submitting documents to Parliament, reports to Parliament. Tell us a little bit about your thoughts here, unpack some of the challenges that we have when it comes to parole and why it's so relevant here, that the discussion that comes up on the podcast so regularly.
Sure. So I think firstly, I must just say off the top of it is wild to me that we would even consider someone who has 9 life sentences for parole. That's the first thing off the top of my head. When we abolished the death penalty in South Africa, obviously the The next sort of harsher sentence was our life sentence, which I know, as you and Gerard have discussed on the Parole podcast before, is a minimum of 25 years of physical incarceration, and then you're considered for parole. But you are under the auspices of the DCS for the rest of your natural life. We also have an enhancement that I know that you guys have discussed before, which is the dangerous offender determination, which stops, essentially sort of subverts the parole route. And instead of going the parole route at 25 years or 30 years, whatever the judge decides, if this determination is handed down to an individual, they then have to go back to court. And the court decides if they may be eligible for parole. So that's so after our death sentence was abolished, our next, I would say, most serious sentence is a life sentence with an enhancement of being a dangerous offender. In Adam Wust's case, there's a whole bunch of things that added together in his favor that actually he's not really getting early parole. And that's the scary thing. He's getting parole. He was first considered for parole in 2018. And the reason that was, and obviously that's not 25 years if you add it up, that was because of what's called the Van Wyk judgment, which happened in 2004. And he was sentenced in 2003. So he literally, the Van Wyk judgment would have made it so that all of the guys sentenced around that time and just before that still got considered for the old system of, instead of getting parole at 25 years for a life sentence, you on credit system or some other form of system that they were working on. So that's firstly why Adam Wust is eligible for parole. The danger in someone like that coming before the type of parole system that we have today is, firstly, what we saw is a complete re-traumatization of the victims, which I've seen in multiple cases, because whether it's because of resources or not, I guess it's mostly resources and perhaps a few bad apples. The victim's charter is not being followed through, and as in this case, the victims are not being contacted. The first time Adam Wust stood for parole in 2018, not one single victim knew that he was eligible for parole. And that is completely against the victim's charter, which, the victims have a right to be advised and to be able to represent themselves in that hearing. And that's one side of the parole system that really, if I can change one thing about parole that I've seen in the Sizzlers case that has been most damaging, it's that. It's this way that the victims are constantly re-traumatized. A person with 9 life sentences, if you're going to offer him parole, it should not be every 2 years, the same as someone with 1 life sentence, for instance. Now these victims have to go back every 24 months to do the same thing for the rest of their lives. So who really got the right life sentence? Was it him or them? So that's, for me, the biggest part of the parole system that I would, if I can address nothing else, it'll be that. But I think the other side of it is that we are releasing, and we can see that because we see our recidivism rates and we see how many crimes are being committed by paroled violent offenders. We are releasing incredibly dangerous people back into the public. And that is because, from what I can see, my very untrained eye, and from what professionals like Gerard have said, it's because the people on many of these parole boards are not trained to understand the criminal mind. Individuals like Adam Wust, he pulled off an entire 9-year relationship with a woman who had no idea what kind of man she was living with. And someone who can do that, who no one would have ever said would have committed a crime like that, can very easily manipulate someone who does not understand the criminal mind. And that is what we're seeing happening. We're seeing pastors and people who are just simply not qualified to be making these very important life and death decisions. Releasing, and there's another side of it is that these guys have got KPIs that they have to keep up with. They have to release a certain number of offenders every year. So sometimes they're gambling with the public safety because they've got no choice to. So that's really some of the issues that have been raised for me that stand most prominently in the Sizzlers case, and that's especially Lee Visser, who I've had such a privilege of dealing with, has expressed her absolute frustration. Until today, she has been treated very badly by the Department of Correctional Services. She had to point out that there was a living victim, Quinton Taylor, that should also be invited to the parole hearing. It's that type of thing that is unnecessary and deeply requires, whether it's reform or additional resources so that we can implement we've got a decent system. We don't have a bad system. It's just not being implemented the way it should be. So whether it's a reform thing or a resources thing, one of those things needs to change because it's re-traumatizing people who've already lived through the worst stuff in their lives, and it's putting new victims at risk.
Yeah. Where are we? Where are the government on this? Where are the decision makers on addressing these concerns?
The new Minister of Corrections, Minister Groenewald, has made a few decisions that have been well received publicly in terms of getting, rescinding parole on, for instance, Allison's, the two men who raped and attempted to kill her. He rescinded their parole. There's a few other cases as well. A lot of quite public cases that he's made decisions on. And he has indicated that he does intend to do a full review of the parole system in his term. And that's part of what you mentioned earlier is I've been one of many people who've been invited to submit sort of what my recommendations would be from my experiences with families, which I'm very grateful for. My concern is that the previous minister said he would do this too, and it didn't happen. And my concern is also that I can tell you from knowing people in and around and, working around DCS that these individuals are not even listening to the concerns of their own staff. And their own staff are telling them what the problems are. So why would he... It feels almost a bit of a public thing that you would rather listen to a podcast and also rather than your staff members who are dealing with these issues daily. That's a concern for me. So I'm hopeful, but I won't hold my breath. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's tough. I've come across one instance where there were a group of guys who were convicted of a murder in Cape Town, actually, and then the parole hearings came up, and I think one of the family member was invited to the parole hearing of the one, and then she was like, "Okay, but what about the other guys who will be coming up for parole?" And nobody knew where they were. They were gone out of the prison system.
Yeah.
So it gets worse.
Yeah.
So
I deal with those daily. I often have victims contact me and saying, we've got our family member's killer's in prison and he's just gone missing and they can't tell us where he is. And then I try and use my resources to figure it out, and it's hard enough for people working there to figure out where these guys are.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicole, I am going to leave the final word to Quinton on this, but just your experience of working on the case, working on the book, what is it that kind of resonates most strongly for you out of this case? What is it that is your biggest takeaway from this particular story?
I think for me, it was how all these decades later, when I was writing this book and doing the interviews around the launch and things like that, how I was almost inundated with people who still remembered these victims and still remembered them not as victims of Sizzlers, of a horrible massacre, not as sex workers, not as members of the queer community. They remembered them as Sergio and Aubrey and Warren and as their brothers and their friends. And they gave me their stories, and I think I'll carry those with me probably for the rest of my career.
And, I think you raise a great point. We spend a lot of time discussing the perpetrators, but I think we should just take a little moment to remember the men who lost their lives in this tragic, tragic case. And so we remember Aubrey Otgaar and Sergio de Castro, Marius Meyer, Warren Visser, Stephanus Fouche, Travis Reade, Johan Meyer, Timothy Boyd, and Gregory Berghaus. Yeah. May they rest in peace. We want to give the final word to Quinton Taylor tonight. And he has a powerful message of resilience for everyone watching. So here it is, Quinton's encouragement to us all.
To be honest with you, yeah, there is. I've done this on a few of my interviews, but I want to do it here as well. Is that I just want to speak to the audience in TV land. And I just want to encourage people, to be strong, man. Life's going to throw you a lot of stuff. It's going to throw you a lot of curveballs. It's going to be nasty to you. Life's hard, man. My encouragement to people is to just pick themselves up and to push forward and to focus on bettering yourself, to focus on just minimalizing your damage to other people and to the space around you. And just be brave. We all go through things. Some of us get raped, some of us get shot, some of us get hit by a car. Don't allow small little things to derail and destroy your life. So it's just an encouragement, just to be brave. Other than that, much. My next kid.
Nicole, your book and your work on this case is just such a vital piece of work. It ensures that these men will not be forgotten. So thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for joining us tonight and sharing your thoughts. Our great thanks to Quinton for taking part in that interview with us, for his incredible courage. His fight continues. Let's all, guys, keep an eye on this one and the parole situation. I think we can all agree that this is not a man that we should be releasing back into public. And if we can all play a little part in that, like Nicole has done, then I think that would be something worthwhile. So thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. It's been so great having you the last 2 weeks. I'm just lacquer without Gerard as well. Let's be honest. You know what I mean? Didn't miss him a bit.
I don't know about that, Paul.
I'm joking. No, you're right.
That's lovely. Thanks.
It would have been great to get some of his insights, but hopefully when we get Detective Jonathan back in, we can get his some of his insights there as well. I'll quiz him more on the psychological aspects and some of that stuff. But
I'll be watching.
Thank you so much, and we'll be watching and listening to True Crime. Listening to True Crime South Africa rather, and we'll be looking out for all the books. Make sure you get Sizzlers Guy. Make sure you get all of Nicole's other books. Nicole, just messages, just people where they can connect to you, where they can get their hands on books. Hit us up with the vital info from True Crime SA.
Sure. So easiest is truecrimesouthafrica.com. From there, you've got all the links to the socials and the places where you can listen to the podcast. And then books available at all the good bookstores and online as well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nicole. And folks, don't forget to subscribe to Profiler Africa as well. Hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit the bell, and you'll be reminded every time that we're posting new content. Yeah, man. We're having important conversations, and it's great to do it with such awesome guests. Thank you, Nicole. Have a lovely rest of your evening, rest of the week, and we'll chat again soon, no doubt. And to everyone at home, thank you very much. I'm going to sign out. Be back next week with the G-Man from Canada. He's at a conference this week in Los Angeles, I think. So you better be lining up good guests for us. Otherwise, there will be trouble. Night, everybody. And remember, Nicole, don't trust anybody, okay?
In a country where 83 people are murdered every day, knowing the minds of killers isn't curiosity, it's survival. Subscribe to Profiler Africa now. It's free, or become a member and help keep the channel alive. Remember, trust nobody.
My first meal, I was scared.
This society deserves to be protected from me and from others like me.
They were sexual fantasies of control, power, complete dominance. They became reality.
Das was just getting rid of it. So went to the garage. I've got an ex.
Shh. I closed my eyes.
Report suspicious activity.
I was crying so hard. And all of a sudden he was there.
It was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction.
I am a human being and I killed human beings.
Dead won't bother you. It's the living you gotta worry about.